Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. This is the Mindful Empath, and my name is Michael Evans. As we continue, at least these first few episodes of refreshing, reinvigorating, rebranding, rebooting, any of the re's, right? Um, I want to approach these first few episodes, which are all going to drop at one time, hence wearing the same shirt if you're watching this on YouTube. I want to ensure that we're on the same page, right? Now, many of you, if you've been following along since 2019, some of this might be a little bit of a repeat, but I don't necessarily want people to feel that they need to go back and listen to hours of podcast in order to make sure that we kind of have a vocabulary a shared vocabulary that we're working from. So these first few episodes are me kind of distilling some of that into shorter, bite-sized episodes because I do want to get to the point where this is more conversational, right? I don't want this iteration of the podcast to feel like it is just me talking about my feelings on the subject, but that we're actually engaged in it. And to that end, if you have a story about how a moment of connection or a moment of empathy or how mindfulness perhaps has affected your emotional intelligence in a positive way, or maybe even not positive necessarily, or how it's been a challenge, or the journey that you've taken, any of those things, your story is going to be the most powerful thing that we uncover in this podcast going forward. Your story. And so if you have something that you feel would be pertinent to a quick 20-minute conversation, let me know. Send me a message through Substack. Send me a message if you find this through Facebook or Instagram. Send me a message there, and we can find a time to talk about this. I am fascinated on how people's approach and the nuances that they might have depending on what they do, because it could be a difference in vocation. I can guarantee you, after a year of being a fifth grade English teacher, that a fifth grade teacher or a public school teacher at any level for that matter has a different approach to empathy as to somebody who might be a nurse or a doctor, or somebody who might be a policeman or a fireman, or somebody who's not in one of those types of professions. What about an accountant? What kind of empathy are you showing, or does that even come into the formula or calculus of how you interact with people? I think it's a fascinating conversation, and one of the main reasons why I started this podcast in the first place. So, yes, while there might be a few early on episodes that are me kind of getting down the definitions and talking about some and laying some sort of foundation, I do want to get to a point where we are listening to just regular folks like you. If you want to be one of those folks, please let me know. So, back to those foundations. I know I talked a little bit about it in the first episode, but in this episode, we are going to double click on this idea of empathy. And what do we really mean when we throw it around? And we're going to break down this idea in three different categories, because it is fascinating to consider that there is a scientific basis of how our brains and bodies kind of engage in an empathic response. We also know that there can be a sensation that is included in that. So you've got the science, you've got the sensation, and then you have this skill of empathy. And somebody can be fundamentally, inherently highly sensitive to the point where they might even call themselves an empath. But if you don't proceed or and work through your life and work through the process in an empathetic way, there is something that kind of gets lost in translation. So, empathy as a science. For a long time, this was so nebulous that it was a hard thing for people to really define. And then neuroscience comes along, and we understand the concept, for example, of mirror neurons. Now, these are incredible brain cells and chain events and chain reactions that fire not only when we perform an action or experience something, but also when we see someone else performing or experiencing that same action. Think about the contagious nature of yawning. Think about watching a character on a screen get a paper cut or an injury and you wincing. If you're a sports fan and watch a lot of sports on TV, sometimes you will lean into that catch. Sometimes, if you're a horror fan and you watch horror movies, sometimes you get that nervous feeling in your gut that tells you to run. It's doing that fight or flight response, and you're not even in it. You're watching somebody else. It's one of the reasons why we call the arts such an empathetic endeavor, because you're trying to pull people into your feelings. And there are real scientific and physiological ways that we can actually point to for how we experience that. Now, the next part is the sensation. And this is where it gets most of us, and I think most of us can understand that. Um, and people that call themselves empaths, especially. If the science is the what, the sensation is the how does it feel to me? When you're in the same room as someone who is deeply stressed or anxious, you don't just think they're stressed, you can feel it in your body. So it's connected to that scientific part, but it turns into our own sensation. Maybe your stomach tightens, your shoulders tense up, or you feel a subtle hum of their energy. Think about walking into a concert or a sporting event or a classroom on the first day of school. This is the emotional or affective or somatic empathy. It's the direct, unfiltered absorption of another person's energy state. And while it can be a beautiful and powerful way to connect, it's also where the overwhelm and burnout comes from. When we become so intertwined and enmeshed with somebody else's feelings, we lose our own sense of self. It can feel like you're a sponge in a bucket of dirty water. This is the raw, sometimes chaotic side of empathy. It's the sensation without the skill, potentially, because the skill then is how we manage it. If the science and the sensation are the automatic, instinctual parts, the skill is the mindful part. This is where we learn to use our empathy without letting it control us. And the first step in that is, of course, the mindful awareness, noticing the sensation without judgment. Instead of just reacting to the tightness in your stomach, it can be you say to yourself, I know what's happening here. I'm sensing somebody else's anxiety. The simple act of naming it, like we said in that first episode, is a crucial bit in order for you to practice the pause and the space between you and the emotion. Allows you to feel for them without becoming them. And then, of course, we move from that awareness into a choice. Now, choices can be how you behave. Your choice could be compassion. I'm going to act on this feeling. Your choice might need to be that you need to set a boundary. Could be as simple as taking a deep breath, grounding yourself, or it could be physically, literally creating space between you and the other person. And there are kind and beautiful and necessary things to do when we create boundaries. You can offer a compassionate ear without taking on their burden. It is possible. Now, final part of this skill set is what we would call cognitive empathy. It is the rational part of our brain saying, I don't need to fight or flee or freeze or fawn. I recognize what is happening in the moment, and I'm going to take that pause. And then, when necessary, you can act on it. It is the rational, intellectual side of empathy. It's about taking that raw data, the sensation that you're feeling, and using your mind to understand it. It's where you ask the questions. Why might they be feeling this way? What are their needs in this very moment? This allows you to respond with compassion and wisdom rather than just reacting to it. Or, worst of all, why am I feeling this way? This combination of mindful awareness, boundaries, the cognitive understanding is what transforms empathy from a passive experience into an active, empowering skill and superpower. It's the difference between feeling drained by the world's pain and being able to offer light and support from a place of grounded strength. So, the next time you feel that subtle shift when you're around somebody, take a moment, practice the pause, notice the science, the mirror neurons firing, acknowledge the sensation, the feeling in your body, and then activate the skill. Use your mindfulness to create space, your wisdom to understand, and your compassion to connect without losing yourself. All right, that's all for today's episode. Join me next week as we dive into a little bit of the understanding of what it might mean to create boundaries and a little bit more on the mindfulness aspect of the mindful empath. We'll see you next week.